Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Leadership Project with your host Mick Spears. We bring you thought-provoking guests and topics every week to challenge your thinking about leadership. Our aim is to help you become the leader that you wish you always had as we learn together and lead together. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Leadership Project. I'm greatly honoured today to be joined by GowriShankar Paramasivam. Gowri is an innovation specialist. He's one of the top 10 voices in India around innovation and has worked with some of the most innovative companies in the world, from Amazon through to Maersk, in all kinds of fields like logistics, finance, e-commerce. And he specialises in this role around leadership and innovation. And we're going to talk deeply today about the role of leadership in fostering a culture of innovation in organizations. So without any further ado, Gowri, I'd love it if you could share quite a bit about that background that you've got with some of those companies that you've been working with. But I'm really curious to know, as part of that, what inspired you to land to be almost obsessed with this field of innovation and creativity?
Thanks a lot, Mick, and namaste, very Indian reference. And it's an honor to be in this forum. I've seen all the other leadership talks, and this is a very special occasion for me too. Yeah, so Mick, just like most of us, I think I didn't choose innovation as a track career, right? I did start my career trying to become a developer at some point, I don't know, about 18 years back. And then I realized that I'm not too good at it. And then I eventually moved on to banking. I did a lot of work with Bank of America, Merrill Lynch merger at that point in time. And then I worked with Royal Bank of Scotland, and then eventually moved on to Amazon, which was a very interesting curve and journey in my career. As such, it opened up a lot of attention towards how technology enables business and how digital-first organization deals with technology and innovation, right? So, and Amazon was a very short stint, about 2 years, but did leave a very strong impact in the way I looked at technology and innovation and the overall time span. Again, as you said, I've worked on different domains. I did financial research a bit. I did a lot of digital transformation during this phase. I did pricing and competition intel with Amazon. And then eventually I came to Maersk to do pricing. And then I think along this journey, I realized that, I've been in the spectrum between business and technology, which is in a very interesting space to be. You're actually translating between two different set of people who think very, very differently, right? Technologists have very objective and specific goals that they want to achieve, and they are drafted out to a specific track. On the other hand, business functions are the ones who move with very sporadic goals and movements in their world, right? So today the market demands something, I need to cater for it, and that's where the technology needs to help me. So my roles have always been in between these two, and I've enjoyed that journey all along. And at some point, I realized that the role of being in between the technology and the business functions needed a certain specific skill set. And that's what I kind of nurtured over the years. But I realized that that could also work pretty well in the space of innovation. And I think end of 2017, about 6 years back, when we ventured out to the idea of saying that, hey, can we build collaborations between startup entities and an organization as such as Maersk with a 100-year heritage? How can we make this work? Can I make an extremely old traditional business work with nimble startup technology companies? And that's when I kind of stumbled into the spectrum of innovation. But from there on, it became a passion that was very close to my heart. And then I think eventually I worked with around 30 plus startups in the span, mentoring, working with them very closely, exchanging a lot of knowledge and intel from a business and a startup point of view. I was intrigued so much that I founded my own startup, which I ran for a couple of years, and I gave it up when I moved to Denmark. And then it also became evident that it is not specifically cut out for a one industry, right? So it is not just logistics, not just banking. Everyone eventually has this, crucial need of, innovation in this today's arena. And how can we cater to this? It also, became transparent that most of these companies had very similar challenges. In spite of the nature of business they were into, we realized that we are probably battling very common challenges and how we could contribute and collaborate with each other. That came in really handy. A big thanks to the startup ecosystem and the innovation ecosystem in India, which was obviously a big jump start to me. All the colleagues that I met there, all the ecosystem players that I connected with kind of put me forward in this journey. But it also helped me to navigate into other geographies when I started setting up things in Shenzhen in China, or when I moved to Copenhagen to deal with the European landscape, which is different for every 200 kilometers. I'm trying to figure out, how things work. And that's how I've landed in this space, and I've been operating in this area now.
Brilliant, Gary. There's at least 6 things there I want to unpack. So we're going to have to go one at a time. Otherwise, we're going to lose ourselves. The first thing I picked up there was the word translation. And you were talking about translation between essentially engineering. Let's call it engineering and the business. Tell me about the role of translation.
So, if you look at how an engineer thinks, right? So they are these deep experts who come with amazing understanding of how the tech works, right? So, which is very, very crucial for someone to build an interesting product or a solution or a platform. And then today, I think it is one of the most sought after career choices, right? So, but when you think as an engineer, there are also some natural blind spots that you develop, right? So, and I think it is the positives of the games that if you have to be an engineer, you have to listen to a specific regime and routine, right? So you need to follow the rules and stick to that grounds. And that's some of the blind spots that they develop as engineers. No offense, but that is their specialization. And when they focus on a specific core, they build that blind spots, which allows them to focus and progress forward. But as a business person, someone who is a functional leader, who is managing commercial, market, customer experience, these are people with a 360 voice that they need to listen into, right? So they are constantly responding to situations. The difference between the language is that over here, it is instructions and move forward. Over here, you're constantly maneuvering based on moving in a traffic road versus a racetrack, right? So these people are on a racetrack, amazing racetrack, laid out, need to move forward at good pace. Over here, they're on a road filled with traffic, people moving in, bicycles moving in. There's so much market dynamics that they deal with. And that's what business works with. For a person who sits in between these two people, one, you recognize the capability that sits on the other side. You know that this can go at a 120 mile per hour speed, but you also need to understand that I need to fit in the complexities of this traffic. I need to accommodate the needs of this market to go along with this engineering and work with the solutioning phase. So my role in the eventuality was to listen, comprehend, observe what exactly goes on in the business language, and then also understand technology in its actuality, right? Saying that if the business comes and says something that is completely impossible to achieve, someone needs to reflect and say that that's not going to be possible, right? So, and on the other hand, when there's a solid pushback from the tech, for them to listen and convince, saying that, hey, this is crucial for business, while it is just a button to add, but it's going to mean a lot for them to, accommodate. So these are two elements that I try and balance. I think even in the world of switching between startups and corporates, the translation job continues. I would say that, when you're working with startups that are extremely nimble and move at great pace versus corporates, which are risk averse and don't want to break rules, you're still doing the same translation jobs. I think that's kind of what it transpired into over the time.
We're definitely going to get to that two-paced world shortly for sure, Gary. So I want to share with you what I'm taking away, the picture I'm taking from what you said there about engineers and business. And by the way, there's more than that in terms of the functions and departments that you have in an organization, but it's a good picture that you're painting here. So engineers, they love to solve problems. That's what they're really good at. They're very good at solving problems. And then I'm picturing the business-minded people that are out there making sure for this problem that we've just solved to make sure that there's a market for it and to understand how big is that market and what would our pricing need to be and what would our return on investment if we were to pour the money into the R&D to productize this solution that we've come up with for this problem space. If we were to productize this, it's going to take engineering money to come up with an industrialized product. It's going to take R&D money. Is that a wise investment? Because there's a market behind it that we can sell this product at the right price compared to the unit cost of the product, etc. So the translation is, the engineers are onto something here, and the business people, yes, they've got a market for this. Yes, we're onto something here. And when you got the match, you're the matchmaker, you're the translator, but you're also the matchmaker.
That's beautifully put. You could say it's a matchmaking job.
All right, very cool. Now, I'm going to ask you a really interesting question here. It's a very basic one, but it could go somewhere interesting here. What is your definition of innovation, Gowri?
Yeah, so there's a lot of textbook questions for that, and I'm going to try and steer away as much as possible. But I can probably tell you what is not innovation, right? So there's a standard comprehension that if you see anybody presenting about innovation, you cannot avoid a slide which has a bulb on it. And fortunately, that is not a representation of a sheer representation of innovation, right? So very often we comprehend innovation as invention, as idea, as creativity alone, while that's probably halfway through the journey if you put innovation as a circle. So in my real life, as I comprehend things, is that innovation is a new way of doing things that has a potential commercial or financial or product outcome that goes all the way into the journey. So as long as it's an idea, it's just about a thought which is not even halfway into execution. But when it is gone through the execution phase and when it's gone through the commercialization phase, that's probably a better way to talk about innovation. And also, it's always not about coming up with something new, right? It's also about doing something new with something that you always had, right? So there are many such accidental innovations that the history quotes about, but even the word just the novus or innovation, innovatia, it's all reference of new, and novus is new, and it's just a word itself as a history. It says that it is new. It is not about inventing, but it is also about using something that you had all along for the right purpose that has its commercial output. So that's how I at least comprehend innovation in my reference.
Yeah, quite good, Gowri. So, yeah, invention is definitely to bring something into existence that didn't exist before, for sure. But innovation can be an adaptation of something that already exists and going, oh, that's really interesting. I could use that technology over here. But I also like two other things that you've brought up there, which is that it is an entire life cycle. It's not just the ideation. It's all the way through to productization, through to the business model, having an entire bringing that innovation to life so that it has some kind of real life application. And the third thing in that chapter that you brought up is it may not be a product at all. It could be a business model itself as an innovation, software as a service, platform as a service. That's a financial innovation. It doesn't have to be a consumer good that someone goes and buys. It could be an innovation within your business and the way that you go to market, for example. Yeah. All right. Very good. Now, I want to get back to this one. It was very interesting that you brought up. You do live in a two-paced world, right? So you work with a company right now that is more than 100 years old, but you essentially run, I'm going to call it a internal incubator. So you connect startups that could be less than a year old, or they could be 3 years old. They could have 10 people in them. They're nimble, they're fast, all the things that a 100-year-old company is not. How do you matchmake, let's use that word again, a startup that wants to run at 100 miles an hour with a, pardon the pun for the company that it is, a ship that wants to go at a certain speed and at a certain course and not deviate too much?
No, I think it's also very interesting how our business by itself, stands as an amazing metaphor, right? So it's interesting, right? But two elements. One, the nature of work that I do is commonly in the market referred to as venture clienting. And the intent is to convert venture-backed entities into vendors for your business, and you eventually become the client for them. So venture capital is bringing in money, and venture clienting is basically you becoming the client for the venture setups. So what I do is in business references called venture clienting. Back in those days, about 7 years back, it was called as corporate accelerators, So it's an area that's going to constantly get new names, but that's what we do, right? So try and identify real problems with the business that can eventually be looked at only from an external innovation lens, and then create a match with the startup market. So now going back to the question that you brought up, Mick, which is very, very crucial for us in our day-to-day job, is that how do I find this match between a problem within the organization versus 100,000 startups that is in the market, right? So it's probably more, right? Just as a reference, there's so many startups out there. So the way we look at it is with the lens of identifying, obviously, what problem matters the most for us, which is going to be crucial because there's a zillion problems in a ship that floats, right? So we are not going to address all of it. We're going to pick and prioritize what matters the most to us in terms of business, in terms of customer impact. And then when we have that one problem that we want to really go after, we try and make it as specific as possible. possible. And one of the reasons that we do this is because over the last decade, right, when corporates have tried creating synergies with startups, one of the biggest challenges that startups had, and then this is purely representation of different founder voices here, is that corporates come up with very broad challenges, right? Hey, can you do something to help improve my customer experience, right? So that's beautiful in terms of a strategy document, but when you want to put it out to action, that's such a broad statement to put up in front of a startup, right? Saying that, and I'm sure you must have seen some of the other thematic or theme-based challenges that runs in the market even now, saying that we are trying to solve all data challenges for our company. Any startups willing to apply, feel free to, right? Such a broad spectrum. Data alone has about 73 different, verticals under which startups today, innovate and build solutions on, right? What do you want them to solve? How specific can you be? So one of the biggest element of my work is to get specific to that problem, find out what really matters the most and get to the last bit of details, peel the onions as much as you could. And once you have that core specific item saying that, hey, I am probably trying to find a company, and this is just as an example, who's making paint, which is offering friction resistance that can be used on my vessel's hull, right? And this is how specific we can get to, right? But as a start, we could say, how can we get fuel efficiency? That's kind of probably the start point. But when you get to the bottom of this, it can be, finding a company which has paint, which can reduce friction when I use it to paint my hull in the vessel, right? So this is kind of the depth that we could get into. Once I have that specific problem, going out to the market and fishing out for the right startup gets a lot more simpler, because now we are probably, looking for 100 companies who are potentially in this market or space. And from there, trying to find out that one or two great technology companies that does that job is going to be an interesting journey of its own. But it allows us to, narrow down the focus as much as we could and pick from a very smaller pool of talents. And that's kind of how we go around, creating this match between a business problem with such a large organization and a startup technology. But the challenge doesn't end there, obviously, which is around, how do we build this relationship between Maersk and the startup? How do we create, a healthy working environment for both these entities to operate in mutual exchange of comfort and so on and so forth? That's the second half of the role about making this happen, right? So maybe I'll reserve that a little bit and then we'll probably come back to it.
Yeah, let's get onto that one in just a moment. So that was a really interesting thing, and I've not heard it described that way before, Gowri. So I want to play back what I'm taking away from that, which is almost like systems of systems thinking. So a systems engineering approach. You've got a parent problem. In fact, you've probably got a parent purpose or a vision. And I'm going to extrapolate a little bit further to what the example that you gave. So I'm picturing Maersk thinking that they need to reduce their environmental footprint, that there's an environmental element of this, that they want to be more environmentally sustainable, that they want to leave a smaller footprint on the planet. At the same time, there'll be a byproduct that they might have lower operating costs because they go through less fuel. And then I'm picturing this problem tree of, well, what ways could we solve that? Well, we could redesign our keels. We could have different propellers. We could have different paint, like you just said. We could have a different approach for buoyancy, etc., etc. And now, as you go down that tree, you could go, which parts could Maersk be the absolute experts at? And go, you know what? That is our wheelhouse. We've got so many metaphors in shipping today. That is our wheelhouse. We know how to do that. We know how to design ships. We know how to do that. But this other bit here, designing a new paint, we have no idea. We better find an innovative startup to help us with that. And this bit around here, around technology and software, we've got no idea how to do that. We better find a partner that can help us do that. So that's what I'm picturing, is this nested problem space where there's not just one solution to the parent problem. There's a combination of solutions that build up to a networked solution to the problem, and they're picking and choosing which parts they do themselves and deciding which parts they outsource. How's that picture for you?
I mean, that's a very interesting picture on quite a representation of most of the meetings that we have, right? So it is how it starts, right? So it is how it starts, and nailing down on that last bit of small, low-hanging fruit that you could work with is also a long process, right? For us to land there and say that this is what we're going to pick up and work on is generally a long process. And very often, people who envision innovation or new technology or creativity are probably still stuck in the propellers and hull design, and because it's not easy for us to scale scale down and consider the smaller and easier elements that we could, fix and solve, right? So it's a tendency as problem solvers, if you want to look at the big things, right? So you want to look at the big stuff that solves and then probably make those large impacts. But in a business of our magnitude, even that smallest impact that you said, that if you could reduce the friction by X, then our fuel efficiency is going to be X into 7. And that's possibly going to be what we want to focus on. Maybe one correction or additional point that I want to add is that we have a significantly large engineering team. So we have thousands of engineers working on technology, software, and platforms. So we are a large tech company of our own size right now. But in spite of that, we do recognize areas where we would want to procure technology and software from the market for all given reasons that, sometimes it is about the amount of maturity that you expect in that tech, right? So I could build a solution in-house in the next 1 year, but does it have the experience and the market knowledge that the solution that is available in the market already has? There's another element that I often bring it to the table whenever I discuss startup collaborations with other corporates is that you could have the largest tech team or support structure in your organization, and you could probably set aside a $5 million budget for just building that one chat bot in your website, but you can never outweigh a venture-backed startup company, which is just building startups chatbots and has about $350 million in funding, right? So there's so much, efforts, research, and solutioning that's gone into companies that are just specializing in a niche market. So it is wiser for you to actually capitalize a solution that is in the market than build it in-house. So you rather invest your internal engineering muscle to do something that is very specific for your industry and focused on your own self rather than accumulating capabilities that are more from the market, right? So I could just plug and play some of these, right? And instead of going out and necessarily, building it all out with the help of my own engineering team. And I think these are some balances that we try and keep when we are trying to look at what qualifies as an external innovation. One is to say, as you said, that, hey, we are already experts in this area. We would rather do and solve this on our own, but this is an area that we don't know so much. Let's get external support. The second is how I could focus my energy into something far more important for my own domain. And then I take help from the market for something that is more of a common problem, right? So we are trying to go all digital payments, a global digital payment aggregation is something that we would love to have. And I'm never going to build that in-house. We would probably buy it from the market, saying that someone who's already fixed it for 40 plus currencies and 170 countries, that's the guy that I want to go with. I don't want to, build a payment aggregation solution in-house. So, that's also the balance that we try and keep.
Yeah, that's really good, Gowri. So a few things I'm picking up there is one's the specialization. One is how far further down the track are they? Might also be the maintainability. Maybe they've got a roadmap that's going to have future features, etc., that you don't want to have a dedicated team that's there developing a roadmap that has to maintain it. There's a beauty with that. And then with the startup, depending on the nature of that startup, I can see the beauty for them would be they may not, this is a may or may not, they may not have the scale or the reach or the go-to-market strategy that a company the size of Merck's could bring to them. So the marriage for them is going to bring them scale that they couldn't possibly dream of themselves, or that would take them a very long time to reach the scale that they're going to almost instantly get through this partnership. All right, now the clash of cultures, the two paces here. And I'm going to throw two terms out here, and this might not be the fair question, but I'm going to throw it out there and see where we go. So you got two companies that you got one, I'm going to use the word bureaucratic, I'm going to use the word process, and then with the startup, I'm going to use the word nimble, I'm going to use the word creative, flexible. Is this a clash of cultures, and how do you get those two things to stick?
All right. So to begin with, it's not a representation of Maersk alone. So what I share is definitely a large representation of the market itself, right? Saying that, hey, corporates, which are rule makers, risk averse. On the other hand, we have startups, which are rule breakers and extremely risk friendly. They want to do things at a faster pace. It is a clash of culture. And the biggest challenge that we have is to identify that common mission on which they align on. So the journey very often starts by recognizing each other's challenges and being vocal about it. So we've gone gone to the level of saying that we want to listen from the startups that we collaborate with. So today, as of now, what we try and do, and many other companies do that as well, is that we conduct surveys or net promoter score surveys from the startups to understand what was your experience working with me? What is your worst and what is your best, right? And will you recommend another startup to work with me? And that's a big question that we raise today. And that is a core measure of my success as a person who works in the space of innovation, right? And this is something that we are putting forward more outward. But the primary success starts in the place where we recognize each other's challenges, right? So when we start this whole engagement, very often set up this ground straight, saying that, hey, we would like to say that this is something that we're very good at, and this is something that we don't do so well, right? We also acknowledge, difference in pace and expectation management, right? Startups walk in and believe that they would want to solve something in the next 20 days, right? In the environments of corporates, our biggest challenge is that we are yet to find that one person who's gone on a vacation for the first 20 days who could probably decide what can be solved, right? And that's where the whole challenge starts. And it's not because anyone deprioritizes or prioritizes personal life. It is just that it is such a large machine, and for it to operate in tandem, it needs to take its time sometimes. And what we do is, by recognizing these challenges, be vocal about it as we initiate these engagements, and also try and find that middle ground where I would come halfway, you would come halfway too, right? Saying that, for example, many startups, and this is not again representation of any startups that I've worked with, but many startups do have challenges in terms of documentation or standards and framework following and so on and so forth. And while we are very good at it in corporates in that space, we know that this is a challenge that we will be having difficulties while working with startups. Software documentation is not something that I'm going to be putting you with a strong gauging scale on, but I would rather focus on your impact and success. But in this area, I would cut a slack to you, right? On the other hand, while working with the startups, what we kind of, come halfway through is to say that, for example, we've simplified our legal framework, saying that what used to be a 50-page document, we are trying to sign a 6-page document, which is a representation of all those clauses. And that happened over the last 3-4 years of work with startups, saying that we recognize this is a challenge. How do we come halfway to help you out? So 50 became 14 pages at some point back in 2020. And now we are down to 6 pages, right? Saying that, okay, you signed this 6-page contract and that's good enough for you to kickstart a pilot with me. I don't want you to go all the way understanding the 60 pages of clauses that will hassle you completely, right? So these are some changes that we went along the way and identified that this is that middle ground where we could meet our common battles and then, and work together. But it also comes up by being open about your vulnerability and self-critical as organizations on either side. And that way you could build a very strong mutual trust in the process.
There's some really interesting things coming out there, Gary. The first thing was the Net Promoter Score. Obviously, many companies use that with their customers. This is the first time I've heard of someone using it with what is essentially a partner or a supplier. I think that's a stroke of genius. That's a wonderful idea, because that's going to start the learning. Hey, how can we do better at the way that we do business with you? I think that's wonderful. The second thing that I'm taking away from this is that if the larger company, right, so the 100-year behemoth, if they were to impose their processes on the startup, they're going to kill it. They're going to kill what's beautiful about that startup, and you're not doing that. And then the third thing I'm taking from that, I'm picturing this world of co-creation where you're letting the startup do what they do best, which is innovate, be nimble, be risk-taking, try things, experiment. But then the picture I'm taking, Gary, and please correct me if this is not right, when you started talking about documentation, I was then leaping into things like industrialization, manufacturability, and all of these things that Maersk is probably damn sight better at than the startup. So if you can let the two entities do what they do best and bring it together, you get the best of both worlds. But if you don't do that intentionally, you're going to kill what's beautiful about the relationship. How does that sit with you?
Very true. I think that's a beautifully put statement over there, Mick, which is true. And then, as you said, I think most innovation professionals, people who operate in the similar spaces as I do in terms of bringing external innovation to corporates, our biggest job is to, capitalize on the best of both worlds, because here we are looking at a mutual exchange of capabilities. And then that necessarily comes only by creating a pollination of these, amazing skill set that both these entities bring in, right? As you said, Maersk comes with some very interesting capabilities of running a 100-year-old business, and the startup brings something that is very special for their own outcome and product, right? And then complementing each other, they could also be probably a 10x if it is put in the right direction, right? And that's exactly what you pointed out a few minutes back as well, saying that the scale and the reach that they could possibly get by working with someone at this scale is immense. And that's what possibly that we're trying to achieve with these collaborations that we create.
Yeah. All right. Beautiful. I want to now leap into the role of leadership, and it is around this culture. So we're moving beyond the culture clash and just talk about culture in general. What role does leadership have in creating a culture of innovation in an organization? Whether they're a startup or a big organization, what role does leadership have?
So I was trying to build a set of bullet points around this whole thing, right? Saying that, hey, can someone put the importance of innovation in the scope of leadership? What would those things be? What are those few items that they need to really do or build in order to, capitalize on innovation as a leader? So the challenge, or rather the biggest element of innovation, is that you have to make a lot of people believe in a radical change that you're trying to bring into a structure or the way of doing things. And you also want them to follow it, follow you along that direction, build along with you, and then deliver to it, right? So that's where the whole structure of innovation leadership stands in, right? Saying that, hey, what are these people doing? And what I'm sharing is probably a representation of few people that I've observed, people who are probably way more senior, or rather representation of innovative founders that I've met. A few pointers that I've noticed. One, most of these people are very keen observers, right? So they observe the market, they observe the system, they create inferences and observations from things the way it is before they could even come forward and say that this is what I'm changing, right? I've seen leaders who draft a memo of 100-page reference saying that, hey, in this last 90 days, this is exactly what I found out about this organization, as big as 100 pages, which means very detailed observations, right? So strong observers. And the second and very interesting element is that these are people who ask questions that are uncomfortable, right? So these are the people who bring up questions that are not so nice for discussion, right? They provoke, or rather they try and ask those questions that makes you feel uncomfortable. And those are the questions that matters the most to kickstart that spark of innovation, right? So from great observers, and second is this ability to question the status quo, ability to question the basics, and ask probably, things that will push you out of your comfort zone and say that, why are we doing what we're doing? So this is two major skill sets that I've looked at. Another one that I've always been impressed to know about is people who are having the capability to look outside of their standard, place of work or organization or the domain of business. Some of the biggest innovators or, amazing founders that I've spoken with often bring their inspiration from a different line of business. Nothing that has got to do with what they're delivering, what they're doing right now, but the inspiration kickstarts from a place that is far outside their immediate spectrum of understanding. For example, an innovation in the space of biotechnology comes from all the way from the space of, container shipping or vice versa, right? So they find inspiration from things outside of them. They talk to people who are not like them. They talk to people who are not in the same school of thought with them. And that brings an amazing amount of inspiration. So these are people who look outside. So great observers, amazing questioning skills, and people who look outside. And the last one that I've often noticed is that people who lead innovation, or people who are in the sense of innovative leadership, has this sense of building this capability called power of scarcity. And this is something that I've been very impressed with the way they use it, is that not necessarily giving all the big guns for you to, go and innovate and experiment. I could always write off a check for a $50 million for you to experiment this, but I will start it off with a $500,000. Tell me what you could do with that. And the way they push these levers so effectively that this scarcity, or the lack of resources sometimes makes you extremely innovative as an outcome. And I think the Startup Nation book also talks a lot about this specific area, but it's beautiful how you could build amazing innovations with the limitation of resources, saying that if it's only this much that you have, what can you do out of it? So most leaders that I've seen who operate in the space of innovation, or rather who are seen or looked up as innovative leaders, constantly reflect these qualities, in my observation at least. So that's maybe a quick snapshot that I've seen or observed.
Yeah, it's really interesting, Gowri. And I challenge people in the audience to think about the 4 categories that Gowri's talking about there, and think about the innovative leaders that you know, and do they do this, right? So do they observe things that others are not seeing? Do they stay curious and ask lots of questions, but the key thing and I didn't think of this before at all, Gowri, but do they ask the uncomfortable question that pushes people out of their comfort zones to go a bit further? Can they transpose? Can they extrapolate from one industry to another industry or from one domain to another domain? That's really interesting. And this scarcity thing, I want to explore that a little bit deeper. So I think the famous saying is something like necessity is the mother of all invention or something like that. And it is invention, that saying, but we're talking about innovation today, but let's run with it. So when someone does have scarce resources, they do have to scrap and they do have to get creative. It forces the creativity. Is that what that's about? Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so technically, what I've seen is that when you push down the levers on what is available for you to get something done, your capability to innovate generally goes up, right? So look at all the innovations that came up during the COVID crisis. It is a clear representation of what we could do with what we don't have, right? So it's not about what we had, but when you don't have. So when we don't have the capability to do something, you are limited with the resources that you have at that moment. Then you see constantly people coming up with interesting ways of handling that problem. I mean, I'm not sure if it's a relevant example. There's a gentleman named Andel Moroso who invented these bleach water bulbs. Have you heard of them? It's actually basically a bottle of water filled with bleach, which is embedded in the roofs in a lot of third world countries where there's no electricity. It is actually a solar transmitter. It has no technology in the backdrop. It is a bottle of water with bleach, a transparent bottle of water with bleach put up in the roof. The light actually culminates through and it actually powers up as good as a 40-watt bulb. And that's, clear scarcity of resource. And this gentleman does it for fun. And now he is actually officially, called out as the inventor of that specific solution. And he has no patent for it whatsoever. Anyone can do it in any country and so on and so forth. But, the limited resources that some of these people have, and there's even a book which is very popular in India called Jugaad, the Indian innovation, which is actually talking about all of these scarce innovations, right? So, people building stuff because they don't have that specific resource, right? Making coconut scrapers out of motors in a two-wheeler or a motorcycle or so, multi-purposing some of these, upcycling some of the products, like, using one single-use plastic water bottles to build boats and rafts for, shallow water fishing and so on and so forth. These are, while you look at it from an example point of view, you see only these small, layman examples, but the applicability of that logic can be immensely useful in large corporate situations as well, right? Making it available for smaller volume, giving only so much is available. What can you do with this? This is the time that we have. What can you do? So that's kind of the idea behind it.
This is super interesting, Gowri, and I've got this picture in my head now of all the CFOs that listen to this show that are pulling out their R&D budgets for next year and cutting them in half as we're talking. But it's really interesting, right? Because there's also a common engineering statement that some engineers use that is, give me infinite resources and I'll solve any problem, which is also kind of true, but it's this innovation coming from the scarcity. You also use the word uncomfortable questions before. So we've got this thing here that maybe having too much budget, too much time, yes, you'll eventually solve the problem, but it'll introduce complacency and comfort, whereas a lack of resources and let's say a compelling milestone that's approaching fast, like a compelling need that you need to solve this problem by December 31, 1999, to think about Y2K for a second. You know what I mean? Like if there's a compelling need, there's a deadline coming, an immovable deadline coming, and you've only got certain amount of resources, your mind gets sharp, right? Yeah, this is super interesting. All right, now we've spoken about the 4 categories or 4 things that a innovative leader has to foster a culture of innovation. What kills innovation?
Okay, so a very complex question, but what I've seen at least is that over the time, innovation is also very similar to, now that we're all talking about generative AI, right? So it's very interesting to take that analogy. But, if artificial intelligence has to thrive, you can't continue to run it only on supervised learning models, right? You need to let it go on unsupervised learning journey. And that's how artificial intelligence is actually thrives. So that's the core of generative AI. So you need to have unsupervised learning process process. Sometimes innovation is also very similar to that. It is a journey that it needs to partake with limited supervision. If you put too much guardrails and force innovation through a very small funnel, your chances of getting a great outcome or a eureka moment keeps getting limited. And then that sometimes kills innovation. In my observation in the past, I recently met a gentleman who worked in his college internship times. This was before Facebook came up. He worked with Washington Post for almost 9 months. And their job was to find out how to get Washington Post better, right? And this was way back 90s, right? So, and he says that we spent 9 months, Gowri. We wanted to fix Washington Post. We wanted to bring something great out of Washington Post. And after 9 months, we had the same exact newspaper with the same exact content. And it is because we were trying to focus and solve one problem, which was given to us in a focused, narrow narrative. But then he says all the research that they did in terms of building a community, what is the need for a newspaper, how you could network and listen to each other and so on and so forth. He says that's the core of what Facebook did around, building connectivity in a community over a network of people. He says if we did the right job when I was working for Washington Post, we would have founded Facebook much earlier just by knowing what to do there. Rather, we were focused on fixing a newspaper, and we got a newspaper back after 9 months. And so it's clearly a scenario where you supervise innovation too much, you supervise transformation so much that you're not able to let it become something out of it, right? So it just becomes the same version, an improved version of what you're doing. I think it's also, I'm not sure if some of these quotes on the internet, I'm not sure if it is real enough, but I've heard that if I had asked my customers what do they need, they would have probably had asked for faster horse wagons, is what they said, for apparently quoted, right? So that's exactly what we do sometimes when we force innovation through a smaller funnel and then supervise it too much. So that's kind of what I believe kills innovation sometimes. Allowing it to thrive on its own natural journey will probably give more interesting results than what we intend to get out of it. So that's something that I thought of.
Yeah, that's interesting. Are we just trying to build a better widget, or are we trying to have a better solution to a bigger problem and give people the freedom, take the guardrails off a little bit? I'm not going to say carte blanche, but take those guardrails off a little bit to give the freedom to explore. And those emerging properties that emerge might be what comes up. I think most people know this story. There's also things like accidental innovation, right? So things like Viagra was an angina treatment, and as it turns out, it was a better treatment for something else, right? So, but with guardrails that were too tight, you would have just gone, oh, well, it failed all its tests for angina and killed the product, and the product would never have come to market. So, yeah, really interesting, Gowri. All right. Now, on a similar vein, I'd like to then talk about failure and innovation, because we hear about this all the time. We hear people on LinkedIn all the time saying that the only way to innovate is to fail, and you got to fail fast and fail often, fail forward. There's all kinds of acronyms like FAIL is first attempt in learning, etc., etc. So tell us about the role of failure in innovation.
I think it's fair enough to assume that it has a very crucial role. So you cannot discount the fact that failure would be an eventual outcome when you try to innovate, right? So it's hardly possible when you try to force innovation towards success, because the intent is to build and create something very, very interesting or amazing, but you cannot land straight onto that through a fast track towards success or so. One of the recent learnings or methods that I've observed from people who are into continuous innovation and so on and so forth, they have this new concept, which is around dispositioning failure while building your MVPs and hypothesis. This was very interesting when I learned it as well. So the concept goes this way, right? So let's say that you're about to build a product, and you start by identifying what are the reasons it would fail. And those reasons will be the first ones you will constantly work on disproving. And if it doesn't work in the first 6 weeks, that if you're not able to disprove that specific failure point, you actually ram down and don't move forward. This is a very interesting thought process. Let me give you an example. There was this oil company which wanted to use satellite images to identify potential pipeline threats, which means if there's a large vehicle that comes very close to the oil pipeline in some parts of unmonitored areas, they want to raise an alarm so that they could stop that from happening much earlier, and the damages can be sealed much faster. So that was the idea behind this whole thing. And before they started this project, they were actually doing this by flying an airplane back and forth. A helicopter used to fly back and forth on the pipelines, pathway, a few hundred kilometers, right? And their job was to just go watch and come back saying that, okay, everything is fine for the next 6 hours or 8 hours, and then they'll fly it again. This was the way they were doing it. And the idea was that, okay, someone very innovative within the setup said that why not use satellite images? Can we just figure out a way to use satellite images to find out any big moving yellow objects or green objects that comes closer to the pipeline and plot it and say that, okay, that's a potential damage threat. Go and spot it and stop it. Seemed like an amazing idea, right? So anyone would approve for it. So the gentleman who worked with this team while in the process of building this hypothesis and innovation, in the first 6 weeks, the question he raised was that, is it possible that you can use a satellite image to find out if there's a vehicle in the ground? The first 6 weeks, they said, yes, it is possible. Great, amazing. They move forward. The next 6 weeks is to say that the objects are, whether they are moving or not, will you be able to find out using the satellite images? Are they trees? Are they towers? Are they actual vehicles which are moving forward and backward? And the result is that it is a no, right? Because they needed high definition, high quality images from the satellite, which was actually far more expensive than flying a helicopter back and forth. Can you believe that, right? So in terms of building frames of images worth hundreds of kilometers and building a technology to read that real time and come back and say whether this is a moving vehicle or a tower or a television or a tree which is closer to the pipeline was not feasible in the second 6 week sprint that they ran, because they were their only goal was to gunning towards a failure that can potentially affect the success of this project. And in the second wave of failure, they actually stopped the project. They said, okay, we're not going to move forward. We will continue to fly a helicopter. So failure is expected in innovation as a journey. As a corporate, the biggest challenge that we will have is high risk aversion. So we will not appreciate failure as corporates, and building that muscle and mindset to appreciate failure, to acknowledge efforts behind a failure takes a lot of, change management, a cultural shift in many organizations. And it would take time, obviously, right? For people to understand that experiments, while in a lab, it's easier to demean saying that, okay, this is the 36th experiment, last 35 were a failure. But when it comes to real world, when you're going to say that I'm going to test that with 100 trucks in Maersk, I'm going to do a test with a vessel by floating it out in the ocean, it's not an easy decision to make, right? So people are going to be very, very scared to make that kind of high risk moves. And it is not going to be easy for people to accept failures, but acknowledging the efforts behind the failure, acknowledging the validation behind the failure could be a great step forward to, reaching in that zone. But I found this specific, continuous innovation framework, which they spoke about, taking out of the failures opportunities much earlier in the journey was a very interesting, and it is very close to fail fast, as you said. It is a lingo, but it was also very practical the way they explained it, saying that run 6 week sprints to find the potential next failure in this process. If it fails, do drop it and move forward. Don't get attached to the idea. So that's something that I felt.
I feel that could be easier said than done sometimes, that attachment, right? So if you're talking about challenging people's identity sometimes there in terms of the attachment, but it is what you need to do. And the example you gave was great. And I am now picturing exactly that you're, by asking the right questions, coming back to the curiosity, that you can test your hypothesis as you go, fail early-ish. And maybe it's a progressive thing, right? So you spoke about the expense of putting a ship to sea as an example. Maybe those first hypothesis, all of those early things are all through simulation, and it's not until you get further down the track of the hypothesis that you start putting real coin on the table in terms of big expense. And then I'm picturing with the helicopter example that when the satellite image doesn't work, that instead of just going, okay, that project's scrapped, you then go, okay, so how else might we solve that problem? They might start thinking about drones, or they might start thinking about something else. So yeah, really good, Gowri. I've absolutely adored this conversation in every part of it, the leadership aspects, the business parts of it, the translation and the matchmaking of engineers to business and matchmaking startups to big companies and thinking about co-creation. I've just adored this conversation, and I'm sure our audience will as well. I'd like to now take us to our rapid round, and these are the same 4 questions that we ask all of our guests, Gowri. So what's the one thing that you know now that you wish you knew when you were 20?
I mean, this was a very personal reflection kind of question for me. But one of the answers that I had in my mind was that I wish I knew that change is a long and slow process. As someone who was 20, I always felt that change could be immediate and a lot of people could be convinced around change. It wasn't easy. But I also had a learning, which is around what you need is patience, but more around perseverance, right? So when change doesn't happen, you just don't sit around and wait for the change to happen, but you constantly persevere towards the moment where the change can happen. So yes, it is a slow and long process, but we believe that, I strongly believe that perseverance can get you there and not really patience. Just don't wait. Just don't sit and wait. So that's something that I wish I knew earlier.
All right. Nice reflection. I love it. What's your favorite book?
So I have two books. I just couldn't decide on one, but two with very different point of views. One is Quiet. It is a book about introverts by Susan Cain. It's a very interesting perspective about a lot of people who are probably not the best communicators, who are probably not all out there talking about the best and great ideas that they have, but these are probably also the ones that move the world a little bit, right? So it's Quiet. It's a big dedication to all the introverts who are possibly only listening and not talking on the podcast. So that is one by Susan Cain. The second one is a book called Influence by Robert Cialdini, The Power of Yes. You must have probably looked at it at least once. So that's another one that I love about, bringing the balance of how to get a yes from somebody. So yeah, so these are the two books that I would recommend.
Outstanding. Gowri, what's your favorite quote?
Okay, again, this is always the doubt towards finding something on the internet, but this is a quote that always stuck to me. It is referred to as something that was said by Mark Twain. They did it only because they didn't know it was impossible. It is a quote that I often look at it. So if you constantly tell people that it is impossible, the chances of them doing it is so low. So they did it only because they didn't know it was impossible. So that's something that I always keep in my head.
I love that. I absolutely love that. That's brilliant. And finally, there's going to be a lot of people listening to this episode who are going to be really stopping and thinking about everything we're sharing, about how you do create this culture of innovation, how you embrace it, how you live those attributes that you were talking about before, Gowri. How do people get in contact with you if they'd like to know more about you and about the work that you do?
I generally prefer LinkedIn. LinkedIn is my primary source of connection, and I've networked with a lot of startups for mentoring purposes and other peer leaders as well. So LinkedIn is the place to find me.
All right, wonderful. And we're going to put your LinkedIn link in the show notes as well. And we might throw in the links to the two books that you mentioned as well. I think that's going to go down well as well. All right. Thank you so much, Gowri. I've absolutely adored this conversation. I feel richer for having it. It did make me stop and think and reflect and think about some of the more innovative companies I've worked for and ones where maybe innovation was stifled and why that was. So I thoroughly enjoyed this. And thank you so much for your time. And thank you so much for your wisdom and insights today.
Thanks a lot, Mick. I really do appreciate this time. And while in the conversation, I was also able to reflect a lot about the time that I've spent working with different companies and different challenges. I really appreciate this opportunity and pleasure talking to you.
Thank you for listening to The Leadership Project at mixbeers.com. A huge call out to Faris Sadek for his video editing of all of our video content and to all of the team at TLP. Joanne Goes On, Gerald Calabo, and my amazing wife, Say Spears. I could not do this show without you. Don't forget to subscribe to the Leadership Project YouTube channel where we bring you interesting videos each and every week. And you can follow us on social, particularly on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. Now, in the meantime, please do take care, look out for each other, and join us on this journey as we learn together and lead together.